Shout out to purestmushrooms.com for supporting my work. If you are interested in the medicinal properties of mushrooms and you want a discount code, check out the video description.
Let's go set history on fire.
What accounts for the popularity of fascism? Why do so many people around the world seem to be embracing one form or another of fascist ideology? Before the end of this video, I'm gonna give you my answer. But probably in order to do that, we should have some clarity regarding what fascism actually is. And this is more complicated than it may initially seem like it, because fascism is notoriously tricky to define. However, one thing that we can do is highlight some of the key policies that fascism has supported over time. Now, what I'm gonna give you is by no means a complete list, but it's certainly a great place where to start. So here we go with my list. For one, fascism started as an anti-labor union movement, very much pro-corporate rights. It advocates the strong role of the state within the economy, but one that works hand in hand with private industry. So it's definitely not free market capitalism, but it's still supporting capitalism. Unlike communism that shares the idea of having a strong role of the state in the economy but does not support capitalism. Fascism also, while it started as a quasi-socialist movement, it quickly made socialism its main enemy. There was a big turn in attitudes early on in the fascist movement, and socialism and democracy were both seen as enemies of progress. By definition, fascism tends to be totalitarian. Now, this is a key element of the ideology, but usually it's not one that it's revealed until after a fascist movement has the necessary power to pull it off, and then squash all the opposition. Typically also fascist movements support imperialism, which again is something they are only going to see once they have enough power to start conquering other places and expand their empire, quote unquote, because in some cases it's not an empire at all, but that doesn't mean that they are not trying. One key element of the whole thing is nationalism. Nationalism to the point of ethnocentrism, which ethnocentrism is a nice way of putting it, but really that's the close cousin of racism. Pro-traditional gender roles. This is a big deal in fascism. There's a cult of masculinity. And this cult of, primarily so when I speak about traditional gender role, I tend to emphasize the role of men. But women, of course, need to fit within certain standards, more traditional approaches to gender role, so they are not very fond of anybody who doesn't stick to those. Tend to be pro-organized religion. It didn't start that way, but in most places in the world, fascism ended up being allied with organized religion. Very much in favor of a social hierarchy. Pretty conservative on social issues, so against abortion, against divorce, in favor of the creation of large families, against birth control, very much against sexual revolutions, whether we're talking about the revolutions of the 20s or the 60s, against homosexuality, against pornography, very strong emphasis on law and order, also strongly militaristic. That's cornerstone of fascism. Mostly, but not always, anti-intellectual, often seen universities as dangerous places of movements that would be antithetical to fascism. A key characteristic of the whole thing, another one, I keep saying key characteristic, but that's what I'm trying to highlight, is a nostalgia for a mythical past. So it's not surprising that fascism is popular precisely in those times when the speed of innovation is increasing, and people are getting scared by how quickly things are changing, and so they have this nostalgia for some mythical past where everything used to be great and wonderful. And last but not least, fascist movements have always been built around the cult of personality. There's always some kind of daddy figure who promises you that all is going to be okay. He and only he can restore the nation to a former glory. This is very similar to the way religious cults operate, with this cult or personality around this one dictatorial figure who should have all the power and he will lead the nation to glory. So now that we have at least a sense of the ideas at the roots of fascism, let's go back to the original question. Why is it that an ideology whose name has become almost a slur in popular discourse, why is it still so popular? Whether people openly embrace the term fascist or they don't, and yet they essentially support every single fascist position, why are some of these concepts still so prevalent around the world today? I think there can be many possible answers to this. My personal take is that it's very psychologically satisfying and it fulfills a need in many people. In which way, you may wonder? Well, for one, you don't need to look at complex problems and feel frustrated by your efforts of creating even more complex solutions, because this is going to make you feel powerless. The reality of problem solving is that it's very difficult. The end result is that most people feel overwhelmed and powerless in the face of such a task. And that feeling of frustration, anger, and powerlessness is usually the breeding ground for fascism. Fascism offers simplistic answers that make you feel good. Never mind that they don't work, but at least you won't have to feel powerless, and when you don't get the expected results, you can always blame it on some scapegoat. The reason why we can't have good things is because of the gays, or the immigrants, or the feminists, or the atheists, or the leftists, or the Jews. Honestly, it doesn't even matter which scapegoat you pick. Any of them will do. They are the reason why society doesn't function as we wish it would. They are the cause of all our problems. Scapegoats save fascists from having to confront questions that they don't have the foggiest idea how to answer. Take some example. I saw some statistic recently that the number of people having friends in places like the United States is plummeting, with statistics indicating that something as high as 15% of men report having not even a single friend in their lives. How do you go about changing that? Or how do you go about dealing with a changing economy, where a middle-class income in 1960 could buy you a house and support a family, whereas now the exact same income, even adjusted for inflation, you're just one paycheck or two from complete financial ruin? How do you go about dealing with the incredible fast technological transformations that we are undergoing as a society? How do you reassure everybody realistically in the face of the possibility of nuclear destruction? How do you solve major environmental problems? Right now we're living through one of the most massive extinction events since the dinosaurs. We see a rise in diseases of unclear origin, since our lives are affected by so many chemical agents in our food supply, in our clothes, in the houses where we live, and pretty much anywhere else. Add to these growing rates of depression and suicide in a whole bunch of countries. Now, none of these issues are easy to solve, since many of them would require us to rethink our entire way of life and the foundations of our society. So in the face of these real heavy problems that nobody can just snap their fingers and solve easily, and yet people are affected by this stuff, they are frustrated by it, they are hurt by these things, it's so much easier to blame them on some scapegoat and then pat yourself on the back for holding the line against the forces of evil and not having to confront your inability to fix highly complex problems. That's one of the reasons why fascism is so psychologically satisfying. It's a great ideology to hide one's sense of weakness and inadequacy behind a mask of fake strength.